finish what you started, you came to the right place. Them girls that you came with, you might have to part with. Depending on how this thing shakes. Wauwatosa, Kenosha.
Awesome. Welcome to Ryan. Oh, sorry, I was just doing some light reading on my desk here. Wait, or this one as well. Welcome to my friend, Ryan Holiday, famous author, probably the most famous college dropout besides Zuckerberg or Kanye. And Ryan, before we get started, I just want to sort of tell our tens of listeners how we got to know each other.
Okay.
I had done a interview in a random journal, and all of a sudden I get a book in the mail with the following letter in it. And it says, "Dear Congressman Gallagher, I was reading an article about you in the Independent Review Journal this week, as one does, and was completely surprised to see a copy of my book, Ego is the Enemy, on your coffee table. I can't tell you how flattered and honored I was to know the book had somehow made it to your offices and was sitting next," this should be something we talk about, "sitting next to the brilliant Stephen Pressfield, no less." And you went on. And I got to tell you, I was impressed by, one, the fact that you had read that article, you had seen your book on the coffee table, and then had proactively reached out to me. And since then, I think it's fair to we've become
Yes.
friends. Best friends, probably, just kidding. But thank you for taking some time to have a discussion.
Yeah, of course. So I obviously don't remember what the paper was, and I'm not a regular reader of it. But what had happened is someone had emailed me, I think one of your constituents who was reading it, and they said, "Hey, I saw a photo of your book in this article," and they sent me the link to the article. And then so I read it, and I don't remember. I think you mentioned the book in the article. So I was like, "Oh, I'll just shoot this guy a note," and then we connected.
It was super thoughtful. By the way, my predecessor, who's a great guy named Ree Ribble, was the one who gave me your book. And then that inspired me to kind of read all your other books. And then most recently, I forced my entire staff to read Ego is the Enemy a little while ago. So it was a very serendipitous series of events. And,
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, and clearly you're a very big reader because I'm looking at the books behind you, and I am liking what I'm seeing. I see, let's see, Deep Work by Cal Newport, very good book, highly recommend. This is Plato. Was that The Republic, or is that the Collected Works?
This is The Republic by Alan Bloom. Yeah.
Then there's Boyd, Fighter Pilot Who Changed the Art of War.
Wow, look at you go.
All-time favorite. That's Flow, right? By the guy whose name I can't
love Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, I think. I love Flow. I recently reread Flow. I think it's amazing.
But then an obscure title, which I was somewhat involved in, that's Dear Reader by Michael Malice, the unauthorized autobiography.
Wait, you were involved in this? I keep recommending this book to everybody.
So Michael is a longtime friend, and he was he's basically a celebrity ghostwriter. He's worked on all these weird books for like Bret Michaels and UFC fighters. And he and I were having dinner in New York City, and he was telling me he's obsessed with North Korea. He'd visited North Korea, and that he had this idea for a book and no one was interested in it. And I was like, "That's a crazy idea for a book. You should do a Kickstarter for it and just self-publish it." And he did, and it was the first book that he'd published under his own name. And he became sort of a pundit out of it. And then he recently did a good book about the rise of the alt-right.
Oh, interesting. I did not know that. So this is one of my favorite books I've read in the last few years. It is hilarious, but
yes.
I think it also does, in a very intelligent way, genuinely convey the Juche idea and other crazy notions that allow Kim Jong-un to sort of maintain this insane stranglehold on power.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a literary perspective, it's a totally unique book because it's an unauthorized autobiography, which doesn't make any sense. But that's because he built the book based on all the public statements and materials that he had put out into the world. So yeah, it's a crazy book and it's hilarious. And Michael is a totally unique contrarian dude. I don't agree with him on a lot of stuff, but that is a fascinating book, and I could see it in the corner. So I'm very impressed to see it there.
When do you do your reading? Are you a regimented person? I mean, are you kind of up at the same time every day? You write from a set period of time, you read in the evening. What's kind of your general schedule look like? It's
a little of both. And we were actually just writing about this for Daily Stoic today. We're doing this like challenge, and I like a lot of people had my sort of whole life blown up by the quarantine and the social distancing. So usually I am very regimented. I try to get up at the same time. I've got young kids, so we keep a schedule. We do all that stuff, but I was much more active and I was gone more often. So I kind of had like an at-home schedule and a travel schedule. And my travel schedule is where I do most of my reading. So I just tend to read on planes. So like when I'm home, I actually don't do a lot of reading because I'm trying to do family time and be present. So I've tried to build in reading the last couple of weeks more sort of in a regimented way, sort of at home before bed. Typically, I try to get my reading in like when I have lunch. I read while I eat if I'm by myself. But I think I'm a very big believer in routine and schedule. I tend to be more of a person who has schedules, plural, based on what's happening in the world or my life. So I kind of have I kind of tend to own the mornings and do like my own thing in the morning, try to get all my creative stuff done. And then the sort of what I do in the afternoon, the second half of the day is more sort of fluid based on what's happening.
So I'm similarly, not identically, but similarly scheduled. But I just read or am one chapter away from finishing this book, Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
It's making me think that I have the entire wrong approach to this whole thing on two accounts. One, I think a point he makes repeatedly is people that are excessively scheduled, and, everything is built around, okay, this 45 minutes is we're going to have a meeting and then I'm going to squeeze in golf in the afternoon, blah, 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 are empty suits or nerds, as he calls them.
Yeah.
Don't think originally or deeply. And then two, he has this heuristic of at some point in the book, he tells someone who asks him for, what are the 10 best books you've read? And he's like, I hate questions like that, but don't read anything that was written in the last 30 years. Or if it was, it should be about history that's at least 50 years old. So it's making me think, with the exception of Ryan Holiday's books, I shouldn't read anything new.
So I have strong thoughts on both those things. First off, Nassim Taleb is a brilliant genius, also sometimes way out there, and probably a sample size of one on a lot of things. We're not all sort of multimillionaire traders who have retired to write and globetrot. But I do think schedules can make you very fragile and routines can make you very fragile. Like I wrote about this in Stillness a little bit. When you look at someone like Russell Westbrook, he's almost scheduled and routine based to the point of like superstition. You can see how fragile that makes someone because you just have to disrupt the plan or disrupt the sort of the control that they have over their environment, and suddenly they become very easily rattled. So that's why I think the idea of routines, plural, is important. Have you read the Paul Graham essay on makers versus managers?
I don't even remember, but this is Y Combinator Paul Graham.
Yes.
Was this the one where it was a high school graduation speech he never gave? There's one good one on that. Okay.
He has all these essays, but I recommend this essay all the time. And basically he's like, there's two kinds of people, and this goes to the Taleb point. There's makers and managers. And managers basically have sold their soul or their whole schedule to someone else, right? Like you get paid a salary, this is your job. So from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. or whatever your day is, you're not supposed to be doing anything during that day other than making decisions, checking on people, having phone calls, and attending meetings. But if you're a writer like me or a manager, a maker, and I would think that a congressman is actually closer to a maker than people might think, because if you're not thinking big picture or coming up with theories or sort of ideologies by which you make your decisions, then you're just reactive all day. And so the point is, you have to decide if you're a maker or a manager, and then you have to realize that these two schedules are inherently in conflict with each other. The manager is constantly interrupting and disrupting the flow of the maker, and the maker is living in a fantasy world that does not work for the manager's sort of 9 to 5 reality. So like that's why. So like when I wake up in the morning, I wake up early. The first thing I do is I don't touch my phone. Like I woke up at 6 a.m. this morning and I did not touch my phone until probably 8:30. So that was I got up, I took my kids, we went for a long walk, then we spent time in the garden. Then I wrote in my journals, and then I did a bunch of writing. And so I could call it quits now and have already done like the bulk of what I'm kind of supposed to do today. Right. And so I kind of have a hybrid maker manager schedule, but the point is the morning is like family time, outside time, thinking time, and then writing time. And then the rest of the day is for those administrative tasks. Like when I look at if I pull up my calendar right now, my calendar today has this interview with you, and then I have to drive to go pick up groceries from like a grocery order that we have. Those are the only things that are in my schedule today. The point being, my rule for my assistant is no more than 3 things in the calendar in one day, because the rest of the day has to be for making time, like thinking, reading, writing, that sort of thing.
Totally. You know, it's so funny you bring that up. Well, first of all, on the idea of the fragility of routine, I think one of the points that Taleb makes is you can just see this in the most basic sort of physical way, right? Like if you do the same exercise all the time, like your muscles aren't going to grow. Like you have to shock your body. Yeah. And the same should hold true for our minds and our more general schedules. I wonder if you're the one who has said, I mean, this is sort of like something you said made me think of the Mike Tyson quote of, you know, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. So yes, you could have someone that goes to a Globo gym and like looks really fit, but the minute you get them in a jiu-jitsu ring with somebody, they're totally overmatched and they're actually, you know, win.
Sure. Yeah. And so for me, like I realize the day is always going to have chaos and dysfunction in it. There's always going to be things happening. So I try to front load the important tasks and the tasks that take the most sort of quiet or stillness, as I call it. I try to do those at the beginning of the day. So then everything else that happens is extra. And Ramit Sethi, who I also like, he goes like, when you talk to like CEOs, presidents, you know, world leaders, you're always like, what's your schedule like? And it's always like, I woke up at 4 a.m. and went to the gym. The reason they do that is because it's the only way to guarantee they get time in the gym. Totally. You know what I mean? Like if you're planning on going to the gym at 2:30 in the afternoon, a lot of things have to go right for that to happen. Whereas if you wake up at 4:50 a.m. like Jocko or something and you go straight into the gym, less stuff is going to interrupt, or as Taleb would say, less chances of sort of black swans ruining your chances of doing what you're planning on doing.
So the way I think about this is I've kind of realized through trial and error in 36 years on this earth that I have about like 2 good hours. And so yes. I will wake up early around 4:30, although I've tried to push it back to 5 now. I do about an hour of, you know, I do my Catholic praying stuff and I try and read something really good to get my mind going. And then I have an hour that's usually from 6 to 7 where I will use an app called Freedom and I'll shut off internet on my computer and I'll just write for an hour. And it may not be writing for publication. It could be to organize my thoughts for if I have to go on TV. But I know like I want to put my hardest task in that hour because I know that as long as I'm good in that hour, then no matter how much chaos emerges through the rest of the day, no matter how much I'm on defense, at least I've taken care of like the one big thing for the day.
Yeah, I think our philosophies are very aligned. And that what you called Catholic praying stuff, to me, that's
the technical term.
Right. Yeah. No, that's so for another person that might be yoga, for another person that might be meditation. For me, that's what the walking is. But I think it's about having quiet time to yourself. And I would be curious for you how you balance it. Some of the other politicians I've gotten to know in Washington, I walk into their office and it's, of course, Fox News is running on the background. And it's like, no wonder these people are reactive all the time and aren't thinking. Like, how do you balance like your information diet with that quiet sort of big picture thinking that you're doing?
So some of this has changed now that, I got married last year and am cohabitating with my wife. But for the last 5 years, I didn't have TV. To the extent I watched TV or ingested it, it was only when it was on in my office in DC. And while I had a Twitter account, I almost never posted on it directly, and I didn't have it on my phone. So I wasn't constantly refreshing Twitter or Instagram. Now I am sort of, because I've tried to, since I'm terrible at social media, and it seems like every person needs to be out on social media to, influence certain things. I've tried, I now have Twitter on my phone, but I think it's been a disaster for me personally, mentally, and I'm thinking about just deleting it. So I've basically set up a bunch of barriers, which is easier to do if you have like a staff, which I have now. So I can just, if I see an interesting article, I can email it to my comms director and say, hey, let's think about this. And they can also check me if if someone like attacks me on Twitter and my instant reaction is to attack back, they'll kind of be a barrier of, okay, let's take a beat, boss. And if you still feel this way in 24 to 48 hours, then we can do it. I think it's been an imperfect, but potentially more useful way of approaching it. But I do see a lot of my colleagues where just watch, if you can, the House floor during a vote. Everyone will literally just be on their phones the whole time. I think politicians are the worst about this because politics has evolved to a weird thing where it's almost like the incentives for every member of the House and Senate is to be their own little media company, not a legislator. And I don't fully understand it, but I know it's unhealthy.
No, I have some thoughts on that. So first off, I think you're thinking about it the right way, which is create barriers. So for instance, Instagram has been very good for my career. You wouldn't think like ancient philosophy would be Instagram would be a way to spread ancient philosophy, but it turns out like the medium is conducive to it. But like I have Instagram on my wife's phone. So first off, like I can't get in trouble on it, right? Like as you're saying, you can't get in fights with people. You're not, people aren't sliding into your DMs or whatever. It's like, it's not there. Like, so I have to go, hey, can I have your phone for a second? I can't be mindlessly doing it on my phone. But yeah, it's ironic that these politicians are so addicted to their phones and they literally employ a full-time person who is supposed to handle communications. And so one of the things I think about with like my Twitter feeds or my Instagram feeds or even now a little bit with my inbox, it's like, you can pay someone to check those things for you. You cannot pay someone to think for you. Like you can't pay someone to come up with your opinion on impeachment or responding to COVID-19 or, ideologically what you think about these issues. You can't and so if the CEO or the leader or the artist or the author, whatever it is, isn't thinking big picture, isn't doing like the making stuff, then nobody's doing it, right? So somebody else can be checking social media for you, can be saying, hey, here's an opportunity. What do you want to do in that thing? And that's where your big picture vision is now applied to the small picture tactical stuff. But it'd be like, it's like finding out that the general is sort of monitoring radio transmissions. No, like they have to be setting the larger battle plan, and then people are bringing them only the most important reports. And so for me, like what I realized is that, so yes, Twitter is an effective way to communicate, but if you are sampling what other people are thinking from Twitter, you are getting the most biased, most toxic, least representative voice. Like I basically, when I wrote my book Conspiracy, which was sort of about this, Peter Thiel's plot to destroy Gawker Media, I the first couple of days I was still checking Twitter, and I realized like, oh wait, this isn't even representative of what the media thinks. This is the worst people in media with the least going on, communicating the most aggressively and in the most sort of truncated, least nuanced form you could possibly imagine. This is not where I just realized like I am deeply unhappy when I consume this information and my sense of the world is skewed. And when I don't consume it, I think better, I am happier, and I do better work.
Totally. It's so funny. Even with an awareness of that, I mean, there are still times when, like, I'll step back and realize that I and my team have wasted hours, if not days, trying to come up with a tweet storm that will maybe be noticed by a few journalists. And I think in general, public figures overestimate the extent to which their constituents are even on Twitter in the first place. One other related heuristic I used, at least in my first term, to try and get around this was I sort of basically made a bet against social media and on long form essays and articles, because I do like to think and write. And so my goal was to once a quarter write a long form piece. So something beyond an op-ed that would force me to think through an issue and potentially, even though it wouldn't get noticed, right? Because there aren't a lot of people reading 5,000 word essays. There's a lot of people tweeting, 40 character things, but over time it would allow me to sort of, think more deeply and seriously about issues. Now we'll see. I mean, I successfully published some of those essays. No one has read them, but at least it forced me to kind of like go through the process of thinking long-term and not responding to whatever the Twitter crisis of the day was.
Yeah, there's an Epictetus line I like. He says, like, if you wish to improve, you have to be content to be seen as ignorant or clueless about some things. And so I think part of it is actually having the sort of strength and confidence to go, I'm not going to be up on every meme, every breaking story. I'm going to deal with the bigger important things. And then I think it shouldn't just be a bet on long form, although you can make a very good argument that one of the worst things that happened to media was journalists who used to have to think in terms of 2,000 word articles or working on a story for several weeks have now been trained for essentially a generation to be thinking in terms of 140 characters and tweet storms. Like, the nuance of an article versus the nuance of a tweet is dramatically different. So I don't think it should surprise anyone that that the media has drifted further left and further right, because both of those are less nuanced positions and more hardline positions. I think this coincides exactly with the incentive for what kind of thinking social media encourages. But I think where politicians and people should really be betting is primarily on going direct to their audience. So, like, if you have 100,000, I have like 250,000 Twitter followers, let's say, the average tweet is seen by less than 10% of your audience. So if I have a tweet that does 25,000 to 50,000 views, that's a huge tweet, right? For me. And so you're like, actually, I don't have 250,000 Twitter followers. I have 10% of that, right? Meanwhile, for Daily Stoic, every day I send out an email to 250,000 people. So and I own that. And Twitter or Facebook or Instagram doesn't come in between you and the audience. So it shouldn't just be betting on longer form. It should be betting directly on owning that relationship. So it's ironic to me that politicians who have the franking privilege are spending all their time trying to leverage free communication on a platform where they can only access a small percentage of those people. Meanwhile, you could be sending these essays directly to people's houses and have an intense relationship with those people. So I think what you really ultimately want to do is own the relationship with the audience. And that's the most important thing. And you could argue that that was the big mistake that Obama made in 2008. He built a huge platform, activated an enormous amount of voters, and then handed that audience off to the DNC when he became president. And one of the things Trump has done well, and I'm not someone who's a fan of Trump like at all, one of the things Trump has done well is, for all of, I think, the mistakes and failures he's had in office, is he does have direct access and control of that base at all times. He happens to do it through Twitter, so I guess it is possible. But the point is, you want to own your relationship with the audience or the fan or the base. That's the important thing.
Well, I think it ends up becoming a more authentic relationship. In other words, I think there's similar appeal for both Trump and Bernie supporters.
Mm-hmm.
They both feel that their politician they follow is authentic. I've been to some of these rallies now, and I'll admit, like, if you watch it on TV, I think it's easy to be skeptical of it. But first of all, it's not it's not scripted. I mean, I rode with Trump, in the car, and he had a script in his hand, and it was only like 2 pages. And I was in my mind tracking, he just completely does his own thing. And it's funny, by the way, but it's a more genuine connection directly with people, to your point. So I want to talk about disinformation. You mentioned conspiracy. For the record, I think one area where I disagree with Talib's sort of way of working, if I'm remembering it correctly, is he kind of talks about, he only writes when the muse or ball strikes him. Sure. I kind of believe more in the Jocko model of like, there's value even if you don't feel like it every day, and kind of, bringing the rock from the quarry and just kind of putting the work in. I'd be curious as to whether you kind of force yourself to work even when the muse doesn't strike you.
So I actually interviewed Pressfield here about 2 months ago, and he has a great. I think as far as writers go, I don't know if you've read The War of Art, but I think it's like the best book maybe ever written about writing. And he has this great line. He says, put your ass where your heart wants to be. And so it's like, if you want to write, you have to put yourself in the chair and you have to do it every day. I don't think it's something that just comes naturally, that comes based on inspiration. Whatever Talib is saying, I would imagine to produce the kind of work he's produced, he's much more disciplined than it might seem to outside people. I'm just not sure it's possible to create work that good that's not disciplined. So yeah, for me, it's about writing pretty much every day. And if I'm not writing, I'm at least working on material that will become writing. So that's reading or doing note cards based on things that I've read, or breaking down and outlining. But I'm always trying to, like books are this thing that you accumulate. There's a Zeno line. He's one of the Stoics, and he says, like, well-being is realized by small steps, but it is no small thing. I think that's what books are. Books are, hey, I think I just figured out the first sentence in the book today. And if that's all that you did move the book considerably forward. And so a book is a creative process of that every single day, like little things. Because if you think about it, I think the obstacle is the way is maybe 50,000 words. So, even at 50 words a day, that's not that many days until you get to that book.
Yeah. So I want to come back to books in general and Pressfield in particular, but we got to eat our vegetables first.
Okay.
So we have to talk about current events. I think in 2 dimensions, both related to coronavirus. One, I think most people, and I count myself in this category, are just struggling to, in this crazy social media environment we're in, figure out what's true and what isn't, right? I mean, on the one hand, we have all these very apocalyptic models, the Imperial College of London study. There was this guy, Thomas Poyo, who wrote a Medium post that went viral about why you need to act now. On the other hand, we have not just coronavirus deniers, but respected Stanford professors who are saying, no, these models may be wrong. Don't extrapolate based on data from China. I'm wondering if there's a connection here between some of the trends you saw in both Trust Me, I'm Lying, your book, and conspiracy. Are you seeing sort of help me connect this to sort of the way the media has changed and the amount of misinformation that's out there? That makes sense.
It's sort of 2 unfortunate trends, right? As people have become more partisan and the media has become less trustworthy on both sides, on whatever an issue is, the media has to be more and more extreme and in a way less and less accurate to get the desired outcome they want, right? And so like let's say you're sort of center to left wing media and you're not particularly well liked or trusted, to get people to take coronavirus seriously, you had to be a very steady drum of extremism, right? And I tend to think that they were mostly right about this, and people weren't taking it seriously enough. But Andrew Sullivan just wrote a great piece last weekend where he was like, wait, so now they're telling us actually people should be wearing masks. And just a few weeks ago, they were telling us don't wear masks because they were like, so it's this weird thing where when the media ceases to be objective and has an agenda of some kind, people don't trust it because they believe there's an agenda. And then so to get over that resistance, they have to become in a way, less and less accurate and more intentional about what they're saying. And it becomes this sort of negative feedback loop. So it's like on the right, you had Fox News basically calling it a hoax and saying all these sort of very dangerous things about it. And then meanwhile, you have other people who are, essentially saying that a disease with a 1% mortality rate is going to be the end of life on planet Earth. And maybe climate change is another example of where this is happening, where on the one hand, you have a side that is sort of, not taking it seriously, has some maybe ideological reasons for being resistant to it. On the other hand, you have people who are telling you life on planet Earth is going to end in 2030. And so, you sort of sit here and people just, I think, end up tuning it out. So yeah, this is a kind of situation where what you desperately need, and I think Francis Fukuyama was writing about this too. He was saying like the difference in the coronavirus responses is not going to be democracies versus authoritarian regimes. It's going to come down to societies with trust or no trust. Oh, and this is a perfect example of when you need a media system that people trust, and we do not have that, and that's really bad. And that's why people are reading random people on Medium to get their information because, hey, this guy actually seems like he knows what the fuck he's talking about versus, this person who told you Trump wasn't going to win, who told you Trump was going to be impeached, who's been feeding you a steady diet of extreme information over the last 3 years, maybe the last 10 years. Like that was a big, on the day my son was born. So again, not a Trump fan, but on the day my son was born, the election returns basically sent my wife into labor in 2016. So we were sitting there in the hospital, and I remember we were sort of like, they take the baby, they bring the baby back, they take the baby. So I'm sitting here reading my phone, and I'm reading some article from some Vox person who's basically telling me like, everything that this means, the world is going to end, we're all going to die, this is a terrible thing. And I was like, wait, I was just reading from this person 3 days ago about how Trump had zero chance of winning. Why am I listening to this person at all? Do you know what I mean? So I think in some ways the response to all of this is to just consume a lot less information filtered through the media to you. And that's sort of where I've had to come to be as a person myself.
So 2 follow-ups. One random. I'm always confused. It does seem like reporters, even those who are not, opinion journalists like Andrew Sullivan, but purport to be objective, kind of live 2 lives. There's one, it's where they, they'll publish a piece as a objective reporter on the New York Times or Washington Post. But then in Twitter world, they are not loath to obscure their opinion. And I've always wanted to go to like a journalism school and say, is this not a problem? And
no, it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. And it's a large part of the credibility gap that I think the media has. And before, I don't actually know how much the opinions of the journalists have changed. Although I do think there's a radicalizing effect that Twitter has had. But their stories used to be the only means of communication the journalists had. So again, they were sort of evolved to adapt to that medium. And now it's like they have 2. So it's a bit schizophrenic. And so instead of being thoughtful and taking the time and being filtered through editors, that's what their stories are. And that's why they're more rational and they stand up more to scrutiny and it's better. And then it's like over here, they can just vomit into their phone every thought that they have. Yeah. So again, a less partisan example, athletes is a great example. Athletes go into the locker room, they pick up their phone, they say a bunch of dumb, divisive stuff that tears the team apart. But when they're doing, maybe an interview or a panel or they're appearing on ESPN, it's much more well thought out and they're more cognizant of what they're saying. So like the Stoics would just say like, you never want to be giving your opinion when you are in the heat of passion or, being emotionally reactive. And the problem is that's what Twitter draws out. And I think it is severely undermined the credibility that the media has.
I think an extension of that problem is if you look at sort of the younger generation, I mean, whenever I talk to a high school class or younger, I'm like, please do not put your thoughts online, because
sure.
I feel like I just escaped the Facebook. I was like on the last helicopter out of Saigon when it came to Facebook, because it started when I was a sophomore in college. So my entire college life, and certainly not K through 12 life, was not cataloged online. But like, you think about all the dumb stuff you said when you were 13 years old, 15 years old, and then think about having to answer for that in a job interview 10 years later, or running for office 10 years later. I just think there's got to be some societal wide movement to convince people that they don't need to instantaneously share every thought that comes into their mind. Because I have about 30 thoughts every day that I think are good that don't survive to the evening, let alone something that I would put in writing.
I mean, look, Trump himself is a pretty decent example of this. It's like almost everything he has expressed as president, there is a tweet of him as pre-president having said something about another president that's very different than that. And so, yeah, it's there's one of my heroes is William Tecumseh Sherman, and he's like, never tell people what you think, because you might change your mind, or you might you might discover evidence that makes you realize you were wrong. And so keeping your thoughts to yourself until you've gone further down the path, to me, is not only great life advice, but it's pretty decent political and marketing strategy advice. Like, just don't go on the record if you don't have to.
There's some Washington, D.C. aphorism that I'm going to murder now, but it's to the effect of, if you hold a position long enough and consistently in Washington, D.C., you will eventually be tried for treason. Sure. Phenomenon, a similar phenomenon. Okay, so just to kind of go coronavirus, I mean, you are an expert in Stoicism. I mean, you may reject the term expert, but you've spent a lot of your time studying Stoicism and writing about Stoicism. I am not steeped in Stoicism the way you are. I'd be curious, though, if sort of instinctively, having been brainwashed by the Marine Corps, there are a lot of parallels.
For sure.
Have you start to think about what Stoicism can offer us in the midst of this crisis, as a lot of people are cooped up inside, anxious about their economic future, their physical future? I'd just love to talk about that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it might seem insane to go like, what would really help you in the middle of this plague? How about some ancient philosophy? But the reality is that people in the ancient, like the idea of being locked in your house during a plague would be quite familiar to Aristotle and to Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, or to be besieged by some enemy threat and be locked into your house. So in the ancient world, in a way, I think what coronavirus has reminded us of is just how not distant the past actually is. Like, we are experiencing what Shakespeare experienced, what Isaac Newton experienced, what human beings for as long as we have lived in cities and societies have experienced, which is like, sometimes everything goes upside down, and you've got to figure out how to thrive in that environment, or at the very least endure and survive it. So like the central tenet of Stoicism is basically like, we don't control what happens, but we control how we respond. And I think leaders haven't done a great job explaining that to people, and they haven't done a great job sort of going, hey, look, we didn't want this, we didn't invite this, it's not our fault, but like, starting now, everything that happened in the past is irrelevant, and what matters is what we do going forward. It's almost like the reaction has been either, how can we pretend this isn't happening? How can we blame other people or other things for this happening? Or is there some magical legislation or tax break or whatever that will make it as if it has not happened? Do you know what I mean? When really what we should be focusing on is, whoa, how did this sneak up on us? How are we caught so unprepared? How do we mitigate the damage as much as we possibly can? And then how do we put all our energy towards making sure we protect ourselves and future generations from it, and learn and are improved by this experience? Because look, a lot of people are going to die. Like, it could be 100,000, it could be 1 million, it could be 10 million worldwide. It's going to be a large number. The only meaning that can come out of that immense, horrific tragedy is that we emerge from it globally and nationally stronger, more together, and better prepared to protect and prevent this from happening in the future.
On the subject of death, do you not have a tattoo that has some sort of expression about death?
I carry a coin in my pocket that says "Memento Mori" on it.
Oh, and, it's not a coin. Okay, you should get it tattooed over your heart.
Yes, yeah. but that is a very important thing, and so like Marcus Aurelius, he's the leader of Rome during the Antonine Plague, which is a horrific plague that would make coronavirus look like. He would have gladly had the coronavirus anytime. For I think something like 15 million Romans died in a population that was probably 70 million. And so imagine, we've been in this now for 2 months or a month and a half. Imagine this being the reality for 15 years. So in Rome, they were inundated with corpses, and the only thing they thought could ward off the plague was the burning of incense. And so Rome was this sort of putrid, surreal, like cloudy, smoky city of, basically rotting bodies and incense. And so every day Marcus Aurelius would wake up and smell that. And that smell of death is something we're very removed from today. But we're not really any less mortal. Like the prophecy that we will all die is as true now as it was in the ancient world. And so he has this line, and it's on the back of the coin. It says, you could leave life right now, let that determine what you do and say and think. And I think if even this idea of memento mori is one of the things we take out of this, that we, it feels like only a couple months ago we were arguing about, these billionaires who thought they could live forever. And it's like, oh, wait, actually, we're all in the same boat. We're all going to die. We're all susceptible to nature. And so let's not get too egotistical, and let's not prize the wrong thing.
I'd like to have you help us, it's just you and me, distinguish between the ability to control your response to external stimuli and the inability to immediately control your emotional response. I think there's a lot of people, myself included, who would want to have thicker skin and would love to be zen about everything. But, and I've sort of come to the realization, I thought I had a lot of thick skin, Marine Corps, awesome support network, amazing wife. But like, if someone attacks me, it definitely bums me out. Or if a local newspaper misconstrues my position, I get angry about it. So maybe you're not I think you're not talking about the ability to negate that immediate emotional reaction. It's sort of, how do you recognize it and control that producing a counterproductive reaction?
No, that's exactly right. So there's a big difference between sort of lowercase stoicism, which we think means like has no emotions, no reactions, and then uppercase stoicism, which is the philosophy. So Seneca and all the Stoics, they talk about this. They're like, look, no amount of training or wisdom makes you not feel cold when it gets cold outside. Or if someone jumps out from around a corner, you're going to be spooked by that. The Stoics were not concerned with or didn't believe it was possible to eliminate that entirely. What they were focused on is like, what do you do next? How do you integrate your response into this? So it's like, if you get in a car accident, your body's going to dump a bunch of hormones. But your decision to say never drive again because you were so rattled by what happened, that's where the stoicism comes in, right? Or again, somebody breaks your heart or you lose someone you love, you should be sad about this. And there's going to be grief involved. And the Stoics would not try to pretend that you should not or could not experience grief. But what do you do day to day? Are you going to be in mourning for the next year and a half? That's probably extreme. And so like I think about this now having kids, like you are obviously going to be feeling things, but then you also have to have the strength and the fortitude to know like, it's not fair to dump this on a 3-year-old, right? Or if a newspaper or someone attacks you on Twitter, you're going to have a response, but you have to be able to at least have the self-control to not maybe put that response out in public without having thought about it. So I think it's more than reasonable to be scared, to be angry, to be frustrated, to be confused, to be nervous. Those are all emotions that I think a global pandemic rightfully brings out in a person. but you have to subsume those emotions day to day through the filter of like what you know is right, the courage that you might have, knowing that panic makes things worse, so on and so forth. So I think it's about having those feelings, not pretending that you don't have them, but then processing them. So actually, to come back to Taleb, he says Stoicism is not the absence of emotion, it's the domestication of the emotions. And I think that's a good way to put it.
So we talked about that, one trick you can do as far as social media is concerned is place a barrier between yourself, in this case, it's your wife and her phone. Are there other kind of hacks, a word I've come to hate actually, or just heuristics, to use a Taleb word, that you could, for those who aren't steeped in the philosophy, are there sort of shortcuts to implement Stoicism in your daily life?
Yeah, I think there are. I think Stoicism and journaling are essentially indistinguishable activities. Like Marcus Aurelius's Meditations is not a book that he wrote. It's a set of him. It's probably not unlike your Catholic religious time, as you called it. It's the sitting there and reminding yourself of what you believe and thinking about it and talking about it to God or talking about it on the pages of a journal. So for Marcus Aurelius, the act of journaling was him writing down reminders to himself of what he believes and who he's trying to be. So yeah, you should be scared. This is scary, but you would sit there and you would talk about in your journal about why you're trying to be strong for other people, how you know that, panicking is not going to help things. It's sort of working through those thoughts on the page. And I think this would be a great time for people to reread, Anne Frank or one of the biographies of Anne Frank, because there you have a really great example of someone who is far less mobile and locked down than you are, a far more scarier threat outside, 16 years old, sort of working through a lot of similar feelings in a productive way. I mean, it'd be hard to be a 13-year-old girl, period, but to be a 13-year-old girl in Amsterdam when you are from Germany, having fled the Nazis, worried about, your very likely impending death at any moment, this is where that journaling sort of comes in. And I think that is a very philosophical Stoic practice.
So we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to go back to fun things like books.
Okay.
I mean, I can go longer, but,
I can too, yes.
Notionally capping these at an hour. I have this. So we started off talking about books. I'm sure you have, your own library back at your farm or somewhere in an underground bunker somewhere. First of all, why did you move? What's your Texas connection? How did you wind up in Texas? And explain.
So I grew up in California, and then I moved to New Orleans when I was writing my first book, just to sort of get away. And I really like the South, but I wanted like sort of the South light. And I feel like that's what Austin is. It's most of the benefits of the South without the intense humidity, sort of all the extremes. So we just really loved it, and so we moved here.
That's awesome. Okay, so my half-baked idea now is that I'm 36. When I'm 40, I'm going to cap my library at whatever the number of books are and throw away the ones I don't actually read. And then for the second half of my life, if I'm going to add a book, I will have to remove a book from that set. The point being that I don't want to just keep reading new things.
Sure.
I want to focus on rereading the things that are most valuable and important and that have lasted. Certainly all of Stephen Pressfield's books would survive the cut. I'd be curious for you, are there particular things that you found yourself that you keep coming back to? And correspondingly, how do you manage this constant pressure to read every new thing that's out there? So
a bunch of thoughts on this. So I like the idea. I also hate the idea of what you just said. and Taleb would hate it as well. In Black Swan, he talks about this idea of an anti-library. So he says your library should not just be books that you've read. In fact, it should be mostly books that you haven't read, but that you want to read and you can turn to if circumstances demand that you read that book. So he says, when people walk into your house, they see these books and they go, have you read all these books? He's like, that's a sign of a not smart person. So that being said, I have over the last couple years really committed to rereading books. Marcus Aurelius, he talks about, he says, no man steps in the same river twice. which comes to us from Heraclitus. The point being, when you reread books, those books are changed, and you have changed, both because of where everything is culturally and what you've gone through in your life. So I actually I was in the process when this all happened of sort of moving my home office to an outside office. And so my books are a little bit spread out now, but one of the things we ended up sort of buying this building, and one of the things that my wife promised me, that my wife made me promise her as contingent on buying the building, is that I would remove most of the books from the house. So we would stop living in basically an overflowing sort of hoarder's den of books. So in my actual office itself, the books are in the other room, but this right here, which you can't totally see. Sorry, I'm just like moving my thing. Yeah. This long series of shelves, this I call my life shelf. And so these are like my favorite books that I read and have reread many times.
And actually, take us through a few of them?
I will, yeah. And actually, Senator Sass has this idea. He says every American should have a 5 by 5 foot bookshelf filled with a library that their family sort of hold sacred of like important books. But what do I have here? I have 48 Laws of Power. This is The Black Swan, actually. So that's Taleb.
Oh, funny.
Mastery by Robert Greene is one.
Hey, and when you dropped out of college, you went to work for the guy who wrote 48 Laws of Power, correct?
It did, yes. So I have Emerson's Self-Reliance. I have The Bed of Procrustes, another Taleb book. I have The Brass Check, which I think is one of the best media books ever written. Amusing Ourselves to Death, another important media book. I have Turning Pro, The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. I have a book I would recommend you. It's one of my favorites. I actually was just recommending it to Malcolm Gladwell. It's called Lincoln, A Biography of a Writer. And it's a biography of Lincoln as a writer.
Interesting.
And so, because I mean, he wasn't an orator. He would read these shorts. Even the Gettysburg Address is basically a poem that he read, and so he sort of breaks it down as a poem. So that's an important one.
Do you read poetry, by the way?
Not really. Every once in a while, like I can read like epic poetry. Like I reread the Odyssey last year, which I got a lot out of, and I've reread the Aeneid. I have Boyd, Fighter Pilot. I have B.H. Liddell Hart's Biography of Sherman, which is an all-time favorite. I have The Power Broker by Robert Caro, and then I have the Lyndon Johnson series somewhere. I have Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, which I think is the best sort of book about political organizing that's ever been written. The Gatsby. My 3 favorite novels are Gatsby, The Moviegoer by Walker Percy, which, have you read that?
I have not. I read the other Walker Percy book you recommended.
The one I quote in Conspiracy?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a surreal book. And then What Makes Sammy Run by Bud Schulberg is one of my favorites. And then I have B.H. Liddell Hart's Strategy. I have trying to think what else I have. A lot of biographies.
These are all. These are all physical books. Do you reject
only physical.
Kindle? You don't do Kindle at all?
I don't do Kindle. I don't have a problem with people who read Kindle. I just don't. To me, I have to physically do it. Like, let me see if I have a book that I've really read. Okay, so like here's my copy of Mastery, and you see all these folded pages.
Totally.
These folded pages become note cards, which go into the books. So I have a whole process. I actually just have you read the Doris Kearns Goodwin book, Leadership in Turbulent Times?
I own this book. I have not read this book.
So Taleb would say that book is in your anti-library.
Okay.
Right? That's what he calls it. And so now would be a perfect time for you to reread that book because of what's happening, right? It's like turbulent times. So I read that book and last week, and then I spent the last 3 days going through it, and this is probably 100 note cards, 80 note cards of me taking the stuff that I liked from that book, breaking it down, and translating it for future use in one of my books.
Are you? I mean, you're very prolific. Are you constantly? Are you like the Pressfield? The minute you mail the manuscript in, you're starting on the next project type of person?
Yes. So like Stillness is the Key came out in October, but it was finished in December. So then I started working on a book that I have that will be coming out in September of this year, called Lives of the Stoics, which is a biography of all the famous Stoics, most of whom were politicians. So I think you'll like this one. And then I
who is the most famous Stoic U.S. politician of all time?
So this book is all about the ancient Stoics, but the most famous Stoic politician in the U.S., it'd be Admiral Stockdale.
Interesting.
I mean, he's sort of not a super successful politician, but won 18% of the popular vote in presidential election, Medal of Honor winner, admiral in the Navy. So he's the most famous of recent memory. If you've read Courage Under Fire, which is an incredible book, it's all about his he actually says to himself as he's parachuting into Vietnam, I am leaving the world of technology and entering the world of Epictetus. And because he had studied Epictetus at Stanford and knew he's going to be taken prisoner and locked up in chains, and Epictetus was a slave.
I probably would have said, like, holy crap.
Fuck.
I'm
yes.
about to land in Vietnam.
Yes. But I just gave a lecture at the Stockdale Center about it at the Naval Academy. It's like an incredible human being. But probably the two most famous would be George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson dies with Seneca on his nightstand at Valley Forge, Washington. In the book that you gave me, what was that? That's one of your all-time favorites, the Washington book.
Did I give you the Washington? Oh, I gave you David Hackett Fisher's Crossing the Delaware book.
Yes, yes.
Which is behind me. Washington's Crossing. Yes.
Yes, incredible book. And so at Valley Forge, before the crossing, he put his favorite play was Cato by Joseph Addison, which was like ironically the Hamilton of its day. And Washington's favorite quote is from that play. He would say, "We should look always at things in the calm and mild light of philosophy." And so that's sort of what we were talking about earlier, which is you have the emotional reaction. Washington had a horrible temper, but almost no one ever saw him lose said temper. So he had this kind of command of himself. And that comes, I think, from Stoicism, which he was introduced to at like 15 years old by a neighbor or something like that. He was alone among the founders in that he would have been the only one who didn't read the Stoics in Greek or Latin, because Washington was the only founder of note that only spoke English.
So let's go lowbrow before we close.
Yes, I have a lowbrow question for you as well.
Okay, good. What is your consumption of Netflix, movies? Are you a big sports guy? I mean, how do you balance all this very serious Stoic stuff out with just having fun?
So definitely big on sports. That's I think one of the hardest parts of what's been happening is
what are your allegiances?
I'm a Saints fan, and then I'm a Sacramento Kings fan. So and not super big in baseball, though. I've gotten to do some cool stuff in sports because of the book. So I kind of have those are my teams, but I kind of have the ultimate fair weather fan pass because my books have been read by all these different sports teams. So I get to be fans of teams because they've read the different books and I get to go see them. But actually my lowbrow question for you is related to Netflix. Have you watched Tiger King yet?
My wife and I finished Tiger King this weekend.
Okay, so as a congressman, what is your opinion of the Big Cat Act, and should it have passed, and why hasn't it passed?
So I'll confess, I was unaware of the Big Cat Act.
Oh, interesting.
Prior to watching Netflix, because I'm not on the relevant committees.
Oh, so it didn't even get that. It didn't even get that far.
No, I don't think it got out of a subcommittee. Or at least I can't remember if we had voted on it on the House floor. I don't think we have. It's possible that it came up for some sort of unanimous consent vote and then and even passed the House at some point without a debate, and it's tied up in the Senate. I don't know. So my thoughts are very unsophisticated, although I think I'm sort of pro Big Cat Act after watching the Netflix documentary. Though watching Netflix documentaries is not my legislative process for making.
Sure. No, I thought the documentary was incredible, and like since I'm out here in Texas, and I think not only like in the documentary they kept saying there's more big cats in captivity than in the wild. I believe there's actually more big cats in Texas than there are in the wild. So Texas alone, like Texas has the most favorable exotic animal laws, and obviously also the most space. And so there's like this roadside zoo down the street from us, and every time we go, because my son loves it, we're like, we can never come back here. This is horrendous. But then it's like, you can pay $50 to feed the lion. Do you know what I mean? Like, and so watching that documentary, you just get a sense of like, it really is like the complete Wild West out there.
So it's funny. I was having this discussion with my wife. Like, is Joe Exotic a tragic figure, or did he actually achieve his ultimate ambition? Because he is now more,
which is to be famous. Sure.
I guess everyone who prioritizes fame is definitionally a tragic figure, but he is way more famous now than he ever would have gotten with his TV show or all the other crap he was doing.
That's true. So what I found fascinating about the documentary is that it's basically a documentary. It's every character in the documentary is a sociopath, like a very real sociopath, except Joe Exotic, who is more of your garden variety, like narcissist, crazy person. Do you know what I mean? Like Jeff, the guy that steals the zoo from him, clearly just like a criminal sociopath. The drug dealer, forgetting that guy's name, but like, you know, talk about people who probably fed victims to their cats. I mean, that guy for sure, right? Yeah. So you have the drug dealer sociopath. Then you have Carol, who is, for all her, social activism, perhaps a murderer, and very clearly, a killer in the figurative sense as well. And then Doc Antle, the cult leader sociopath. It's literally a documentary of different kinds and manifestations of sociopathy, and you're just like watching them fight it out with each other and try to adjust to reality. I thought it was one of the most incredible things ever caught on film.
So here's a question. Stoic or sociopath, the lady, and I forget her name, who gets her arm eaten off, spoiler alert, by a tiger, and then the next day is like, yeah, I didn't want the reconstructive surgery, just amputate it, and then 3 days later she's back at work. And the whole documentary is like, no big deal.
Yeah. That is as stoic as they come. I mean, that was incredible. That was like Civil War level incredibleness, like where they're sawing off bones without any medicine, and she just like went back to work. That was completely nuts. The whole thing from start to finish was insane. And I got to figure that the sociopathy and being able to be in a cage with a tiger are somewhat related. So I think Joe Exotic was able to go in those cages and not be scared, probably because a lot of times he was on meth, right? Like that would help. Yeah. Whereas
I think they underplayed the role of meth in the whole story. I mean, it's mentioned at various points, but
they kind of just showed it in his husband, who was inexplicably shirtless and had no teeth. Right. But like, did you see the scene where like the Jeff and his one of his girlfriends are in the tiger cage, and the tiger starts to get violent, and he's like, get out of the cage, and so she runs, and then he just like punches the tiger in the face, the line of face. Like a normal person cannot do that. Like you would freak out. Like you would have a fight or flight reflex. Do you know what I mean? Like I think that there must be something that like I just could not go in a tiger cage. And I don't think any amount of military training equips someone to go into a tiger cage. I think you have to be missing some fundamental human ingredient that they must have early on figured out they don't have, and that allows them the thrill of like true danger. Do you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah,
like a
totally.
normal person does not want to play with a leopard.
Totally. Well, okay. So 2 serious questions to end on.
Wait. Let me tell you
wait,
one other thing.
sorry.
We did book recommendations. Here's an incredible book recommendation. I am obsessed with weird human animal stories. So I like that. I've read hundreds of books about tigers and people who own tigers and lions, and I find it fascinating. There's a book called Kingdom Under Glass, which is about this guy named Carl Lackley, I think. And he is basically the inventor of taxidermy. Like almost all the animals in the Natural History Museum in New York City, either Theodore Roosevelt shot or he shot, and he invented modern taxidermy. They used to just stuff animals with straw and then hope that it made it look like a thing. He invented like the wire mesh that goes around the body. Anyways, long story short, he was one of the most incredible badasses of all of history. There's this story of him being attacked by a leopard in Africa on some mission for the Smithsonian. And this is crazy. He's attacked by a leopard and it's killing him and it's like attacking his face. And he grabs it and he sticks his hand down its throat into his stomach and he strangles it from the inside while it's gnawing on his arm. And it's the most crazy book you will ever read, and you have to read it.
How has there not been a movie made about it?
I don't know. The book came out. It did not do super well, but I did see Joe Rogan mention it recently. So it probably is now fast-tracked for a movie, but it's an incredible book.
Okay, so so you mentioned rules. Is it Rules of Power on your shelf? I'd just be curious.
48 Laws of Power.
48 Laws of Power. Sorry, the role that mentors have played in your own career and how conscious you are about seeking mentor-mentee relationships, and also now that you're in a position to be a mentor.
Sure. Yeah, I don't think I would be a writer without having learned. So the note cards I was showing you, I learned that system as a research assistant for Robert Greene. So I didn't come to writing going like, I want to write a book. I have lots to say. That came later. What I first figured out was the process of doing books. So I figured I had like training in the craft first, and then the inspiration came later. So I would not be a writer without Robert Greene, and I think is a sort of a deeply important thing, and it actually goes to the core of Stoicism. Zeno was mentored by this guy named Crates. Seneca, ironically, was the mentor of Nero, trying to prevent him from becoming insane. Marcus Aurelius, was influenced by Epictetus, but then had a tutor named Junius Rusticus, who, as I was just writing about as a Catholic, you might not like this, but Marcus Aurelius's mentor, Junius Rusticus, becomes essentially sort of the governor of Rome as part of his service with Nero, with Marcus, and he's actually the one who adjudicates Justin Martyr's trial and sentences him to death.
Interesting.
So there's a really interesting Stoicism Christianity tie-in. They were at odds for a very long time.
Sidebar question: given your interest in Rome and all things ancient, do you support the HBO show Rome?
I have only watched chunks of it. I didn't like it a ton. I didn't hate it, but I do think Gladiator is an incredible movie, and weirdly, both very historically inaccurate, but also historically accurate in that Commodus probably was as bad as Joaquin Phoenix says. And that's Marcus Aurelius's son. Really, though, the movie of Gladiator is the story of Cincinnatus, which I think is one of the greatest myths of history. And to tie this back to what we're talking about, Cincinnatus was George Washington's hero. And
something called the Cincinnati Society that celebrates, all these Revolutionary War dudes.
And do you know why do you know what that comes from?
Well, at least in terms of the myth is that Cincinnatus sort of threw down his sword and went back to his farm in the same way that George Washington decided not to run for a third term and become king and go back to his farm.
Yeah. There's a great book by George Willis called Cincinnatus that's about George Washington, but basically Washington, he basically the author's premise is that George Washington's entire life was about trying to reenact the myth of Cincinnatus, which is the farmer is called to save Rome, comes in, is named dictator, does everything that he can, saves Rome, and then retires to his farm. And that actually Washington does this 3 times. He resigns his regimental commission. He basically, after the Revolutionary War, resigns. After the Article of Confederation, resigns and returns to his farm. And then after his second term, resigns and returns to his farm. And that this is the power of ancient history. It's to inspire us to do great things in the present moment. It's not supposed to be this dead, ancient thing. It's supposed to be a living, breathing thing.
Well said. Final question. Let's say you walk into a bar in Northeast Wisconsin. You're not wearing your Saints gear, just to avoid getting in fights. Although we're nice here, no one would hold it against you. And let's say a 17-year-old, a senior at a high school in Green Bay comes up to you and says, "Oh, Ryan, I love your books. Blah, blah, blah. You're awesome. I subscribe to all your stuff. Thinking about becoming a writer.
Yeah.
I don't know if I should go to college or how does one, is this a good idea? What advice would you give to that young kid?"
So usually my advice is that college is the best default, but obviously it should be an affordable college. Don't rack up $200,000 in debt because you don't know what you're doing. You're just trying to figure it out. But I'd say hey, there's a bunch of great state schools in Wisconsin. Get into one of those, and then to be a writer, you have to go and experience and do things and learn. So I'd say take classes in as many things as you possibly can. There would be let's say University of Wisconsin, probably 80% of the faculty is a published author, right? What can you learn from those people? Those people are forced to sit in their office a certain number of hours per week and do nothing but talk to students, and how few students take them up on this. So that was something I did in college. I went and met as many of the professors I possibly could, asked them as many questions, learned as much as I could. And then when I had an opportunity to go do stuff, I left to do that. And I left college in 2006 or 7, but my first book did not come out until 2012. So it took 6 or 7 years of writing and learning and experiencing to go into the book. So I think being a writer it's about training, it's about knowledge, and then it's about experience. And it's those 3 things coming together. Obviously, having a load of debt or having no prospects on the job market, I think makes accumulating those 3 things more difficult. So college has to fit in there to some degree.
Wise words. And if you're wondering why this hypothetical 17-year-old is at a bar,
yes.
In Wisconsin, if you're with your parents, you're allowed to.
Oh, interesting.
There's a weird gap between 18 and 21 where you're not, but prior to that, it's a perk of Wisconsin. So,
interesting.
Brian, this was awesome. Thank you for
this is so cool, man.
And hopefully I didn't screw up the technical side of this, but this is a real treat. So
no, I can see it's recording. So we'll awesome, man. Appreciate it.
Good. Take it easy.